Hello, everybody. This is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today, we're going to talk about the original language of the church and how this has evolved. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sequitur in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. This should be an actual 5-minute episode. So the original language of the church would have been Aramaic. So that was the language of Jesus. That's the language that Jesus spoke. Hebrew was used at the time, but Hebrew is more for kind of the Jewish liturgical language. But the language of that area of the Holy Land was Aramaic. So if you look at the apostles, if you look at the early Jewish converts to the way, to Christianity, it would have been Aramaic. So when we talk about the early liturgy, and we have an episode here how the Mass in its proto form existed before the writings of the New Testament, if you would have looked at the early Masses, they would have been done in Aramaic. Now, Koine Greek was spoken in the Holy Land. This was after Alexander the Great, and he brought a lot of that Hellenistic influence to the Holy Land a few hundred years beforehand, about 300 years beforehand. So it's certainly Greek was being spoken, but the day in, day out language of the church when it was in Palestine still would have been Aramaic. So masses at that time would have been Aramaic. Now, as the church spread, and a lot of that spreading did go east, so because we know like St. Thomas died in India and went to Armenia, some people went down into Egypt and Ethiopia, but the majority went west, and most famously this would be Peter and Paul. As they went west into Anatolia or Asia Minor and into Thrace and Greece and these kind of areas, they encountered much more Greek. And so you see the first few hundred years of the church, the liturgy being more commonly done in Greek, because that was the language that kind of binded the Eastern Mediterranean basin, whether you were in Alexandria in Egypt, or you were in Syria, or if you were in Palestine, or if you were in Asia Minor, or of course Greece, any of these places, even Sicily, you would have seen Greek being spoken. That was the lingua franca, so to speak. So you would see liturgies being done in Greek, and that was quite common. And then as the church spread to the capital, and of course Peter and Paul died in Rome, but as you saw the church spread into other areas of Europe, eventually it did go into Latin. Now, when that change happened, because even in Rome, masses were being done in Greek for the first several hundred years. We know the early church in Rome was persecuted quite a bit by several persecutions, most famous probably being Nero's and Diocletian's at the end of the second 200s. Masses were pretty much in Greek the first few hundred years. But then you saw the transformation in the kind of more Italian peninsula and further west of it being turned to Latin, because that was the lingua franca of the Roman Empire on that side of the Roman Empire. And so you saw changes to the liturgy being done in Greek. Now, there were some saints that were cool with it. Some people were cool with it. There were some, like St. Hippolytus, wasn't too happy about the Mass being changed from Greek to Latin. But again, understand, the Mass in its form at this time, it really doesn't matter what language it's done. And this is one of the beauties of the Catholic Church. It's universal. So you're going to see customs develop and traditions develop, small t traditions develop in different parts of the world. And you see that in the different rites, R-I-T-E-S's, that we have in the church. We have like 23 rites. And you see these different changes in these different rites that allows for this kind of accommodation. The Mass is not invalid because it's in English, or if it's because it's in Latin, or because in Greek or Syriac or Malabar or whatever it is. So starting in the 200s, mid-200s, and then later in the 300s, then you saw, at least in the Western Empire, that western part of the Mediterranean basin, because the Roman Empire essentially fell in the mid-400s, Masses were being done in Latin. And as we go through the medieval period, and I'll put a banner for the playlist for Christian history, as the kingdoms of Europe got larger, and eventually as they spread through the age of exploration, of course the Latin Mass is going to be the Mass that went to the Americas. It was the Mass that went to Africa and so forth, whereas the Byzantine Empire didn't really have an overseas empire because it fell by the time that the age of exploration began. And really, the age of exploration owes a lot to the fall of Constantinople in 1453, because the Muslims, the Ottomans, blocked the trade routes toward the Red Sea and the quicker way to India. And so they had to come up, the Western nations had to come up with another way to get around. So in closing, originally it was going to be Aramaic, then for several hundred years it was Greek, and now the preponderant one is Latin. But of course we have different rites, and in these different rites, their masses are done in that particular language. So, like with change, and change can bring controversy, and even with the Novus Ordo Mass, which was rolled out in 1970, which allows for the Mass to be in the vernacular, so it's in the language of the country that it's in. So if you're in Italy, it's going to be in Italian. If you're in France, it's going to be in French. If you're in the Philippines, it's going to be in Tagalog. If you're in Pakistan, it's going to be in Urdu, though I doubt there's a lot of Catholic Pakistanis. It's going to be in the local language. There's going to be some transition. And certainly there's going to be certain types, especially the Sedevacanists, who'll tell you that the words of consecration have been changed in the Novus Ordo to the point where it invalidates it. I'm neither here nor there. I am not a canon lawyer to say that. But what I'm saying is that as the church grows from the mustard seed to spreading to every corner of the earth, you're going to see linguistic changes to the liturgy. And in my humble opinion, I don't think it really changes anything. It's just the growth of the church. So if you like Mass in Latin because you are a Latin Rite Catholic, that's great. Go to a Latin, go to a TLM. That's great. If you are a Byzantine Eastern Rite, go to the Greek. I've never gone to a Greek Mass. I would love to go to a Greek Mass. If I ever go to India, I'd like to go to a Malabar. If there's a parish here in America that's got one of the rites, I would love to go to it just to see what it's like. They're all good and equal because they're all part of Holy Mother Church. Guys, post in the comments. I'd like to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care. God bless you.